Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Prodigy, Season 1, Episode 12, Let Sleeping Borg Lie. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Prodigy. So I have to start with the spoiler warning for Star Trek Prodigy up to Season 1, Episode 12. If you have not seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, I'm really starting to dig the overarching serialized story of the show. I like the way this episode opened with the callback to the mid-season finale is showing how Gwen regained her memories and is sharing it with the crew. And I like how they're watching it on the holodeck. It really ties everything together, and moreover, it's making me feel much better about that mid-season finale, because when I first saw it, I was a bit unsure how to feel. I wasn't that on board with the premise of the Diviner being from the future and the Protostar being a weapon. I completely did not understand. Of course, that's explored more in the previous and in this episode. So I actually am feeling a lot better about the overarching story of the show. However, the main plot of this episode was kind of, to coin a phrase, irrelevant. It was kind of just an indulgence because they don't learn anything new from their adventures on the Borg ship. So it was kind of just an indulgence, just a side track, which, is fine, particularly in the kids show. They go on their little side adventures that keeps things going. We don't always have to focus entirely on the main plot, and we did get enough touching on the main plot. I mean, more than that, they actually discovered where the weapon was, and that was interesting. There was a hidden room that only Gwen could open, but they have no ways to destroy the weapon or get rid of it. Jacob Pobb shooting the weapon with his phaser kind of reminded me of Gimli trying to smash the One Ring with his axe. A pointless exercise. But, someone suggested throwing it into space, but then I believe it was Zero or someone else saying, well, then someone else is just going to pick it up and then they'll have this weapon. So, which is a fairly good point. Although, if they don't know, apparently this weapon is tailor-made for Starfleet and the Federation, so if they didn't know that, they wouldn't, and plus they're in the Delta Quadrant, but whatever. It does seem like it wouldn't be the best solution, but it also seems like they dismissed it all too quickly. But because the plot required them to not do that. But that's fine. But yeah, so then the main storyline is with the Borg ship. Yeah, and this did seem just like a way to introduce the Borgs to the kiddies. It did, I feel like the aim of Prodigy is to introduce Star Trek to a new generation. And so I think that's why they want to touch on some of the more important or well-known aspects of Star Trek, and part of that is the Borg. And so it seems like this was just their way to introduce the Borg, like having a hologram Janeway explain who the Borg are to our main characters is it's like the show itself explaining who the Borg are to a new generation who's never seen them before. And I do feel like a lot of the structure of the show, having the focus of our main characters be characters outside of Starfleet and Federation who know nothing about it, but then having the Janeway hologram as their guide, the whole structure is intended to be like the show explaining to a younger generation the deal with Star Trek, so they didn't feel lost, while at the same time allowing them to explore the greater world of Star Trek. We just have this helpful exposition dispenser to explain it to those who haven't seen it before, which I actually think is a really good idea, especially for a kids show. So I do have to praise them for that, and I think it actually did work well in this. And I got a on my Discord, one of my Patreon supporters, Norman Buchwald, posted something this morning saying, do we really need to introduce the Borg to the kiddies? And I think it's inevitable. It's not something I really want to see, but from the showrunner's perspective, yeah, I think they do, especially since they're in the Delta Quadrant. Like, you gotta touch on the Borg, and I thought this was a fairly inoffensive way to do it. Like, I wasn't bothered by it. First of all, most importantly, we did not see the Borg Queen, because that was... I feel like the Borg were actually fine in Voyager. It's once they introduced the Borg Queen, they started bringing her back over and over again. That's when Voyager ruined the Borg. And same with Picard season 2. That was the biggest. Like in season 1, when they had that derelict Borg ship and Hugh exploring it, that was fine. But in season 2, they brought in the Borg Queen, and that's when it all went to hell. The Borg Queen is the major fault. I actually think the Borg would have been fine on Voyager had they never introduced the Borg Queen. We had some good Borg episodes on Voyager that before they introduced the Borg Queen, like Scorpion, Raven, Drone, all some of my favorite episodes of the whole show. But once they introduced that Borg Queen, that's when everything just went to crap. So I didn't mind this episode that much because there was no Borg Queen. Now, the one little thing that was irritating about this episode is that they were going by the old rule that you can just wander around the Borg ship and they won't do anything to you as long as you're not a threat. See, that rule was sort of made up in the very first appearance of the Borg Q-Who, but in that episode, the Borg were something different than what they became, what they evolved to, because in that situation, the Borg only assimilated technology and they cared nothing about biological life forms. They would just remove them in order to get to the technology. And later, they kind of morphed the Borg and changed their agenda to be wanting to assimilate biological life forms. So therefore, their tendency to, they'll just leave you alone as long as you're not a threat doesn't actually make sense anymore for what they turned the Borg into, because now they want to assimilate people, so why would they leave you alone when there's a perfectly good drone standing in front of them that they could assimilate? To be fair, other Star Trek, I think Voyager itself got this mixed up and would mix up these things as well. So it's not just a Prodigy thing, but they did focus on it. They featured prominently in this episode that they were just able to wander around the Borg ship while the Borg were sleeping. Even when they woke up, they just walked past Gwen as long as she didn't present herself as a threat, which is it was something that's outdated when the Borg were something different than what they are now. So you can retcon the Borg changed and make him more interested in assimilating than just only interested in technology, but you have to fix everything that comes along with it. Otherwise, it won't make sense. But all that being said, this is a kids show, and similar to Lower Decks, where I give a lot more leeway in suspension of disbelief because it's a comedy, I give a lot more leeway in suspension of disbelief with Prodigy because it's a kids show. So, so they're going to play a bit more fast and loose in order so they can have their Borg episode, even though it does seem contrived that our main characters actually managed to get away unassimilated. And I do think they were a bit heavy-handed with tying in the main plot with Zero and their feelings of regret for hurting Gwen. I mean, I kind of like that they explored that, and that's something that is a guilty feeling that's weighing on Zero's conscience. But I think they overdid it by having that be the thing that allowed Zero to break free from the Borg, and that guilt was what was weighing Zero down, allowed them to assimilate them in the first place. I don't know. Like, it somewhat works for me, but I think they overdid it. It seemed a little tad bit contrived, but again, I am willing to give a bit more leeway for the kids show aspect of it. But so I did like the character development, and that's always been to me the biggest strength of this show, is the characters and how fleshed out they are and the good character development they do. That the way they did it in this episode was a little contrived, but overall it still worked for me. And it's, yeah, so we had to have our obligatory Borg episode. This was pretty non-offensive in that manner. Just, I do hope that they don't keep bringing the Borg back, first of all, and especially do not bring in the Borg Queen. Although, to be fair, if there's any character in Star Trek pre-existing lore that's cartoonish, that would be the Borg Queen. But still, no, please don't bring the Borg Queen in. And in fact, I would prefer them not to touch on the Borg again. But as in isolation, this episode was fine. As I said, it's kind of a side step from the main plot, but it did, though it did in contrived ways, it did help further some of the character story. Now, the other thing we keep flashing back to the real Admiral Janeway on her ship, and this time we do get introduced to the Tellarite Doctor, who is voiced by Jason Alexander, which I was correct, I misunderstood by thinking he voiced the Denoblian scientist, which he did not. He voiced and I could tell it a bit more. He's still not going Jerry, but I could tell a bit more that that's Jason Alexander. But speaking of the Denoblian scientist, where is he? Like, he escaped in the escape pod. Why? And then when Janeway showed up, they were like, "Oh, there's no life signs." I'm like, "What? How did he die? Did the station kill him after he ejected?" That's pretty dark. But I thought it was a wasted opportunity, because that could have been a great way for the scientists to come on board and explain things to Janeway. But I think maybe that's the trick. Maybe the show doesn't want Janeway to know about the Protostar and its new crew yet. Maybe. Maybe that the Denoblian Doctor is floating around on his way back to the Federation. I don't really know. But there's this lingering threat of the Diviner waking up. And I've heard different theories, like that he might be like a bit insane, or that he might have lost his memories entirely, the same way Gwen did. Or he could be this like evil character. There's several different ways they could play it. So I'm interested. As I said, I'm interested in the overarching story of the show. I think even more so than I was in the first half of the season. So far I'm liking the second half. So my rating for Let Sleeping Borg Lie out of 10 is a 7. Very good. It's a very acceptable episode. Not entirely necessary and maybe a bit clunky with their character development, but it's a kids show, so as I said, I'm willing to give it a bit of leeway with that. Yeah, it was interesting. It's got me interested in the overall plot of the season, I will say. So that's it for my review of the latest episode of Prodigy. I will be back here next week and every week thereafter to keep reviewing Prodigy, so be sure to check out my channel for that, and also check out my channel for many more reviews on many more Star Trek shows, starting my full-on coverage of going through every episode I have yet to go through on Star Trek, the original series. That starts next week. And of course, I cover many other shows on my channel as well, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.